Before they became one of the most influential bands in modern alternative music, Deftones were almost nothing more than a local Sacramento experiment. They didn't fit the metal scene, they didn't fit alternative radio, and for years no one could figure out what they were supposed to be. Their early shows were chaotic, their sound was emotional, heavy, and unpredictable, and their future was anything but certain. This is the story of Deftones before they were famous. In the early 1990s, Sacramento was not a music city. It didn't have the mythology of Seattle. It didn't have the glamour of Los Angeles. It wasn't a place where labels went searching for the next big thing. Sacramento was suburban, spread out, and largely ignored by the music industry. For young musicians growing up there, that lack of attention created a strange kind of freedom. There was no sound to live up to, no scene to impress, no expectations to meet. Music became less about fitting in and more about release. That environment shaped Deftones. Deftones didn't form around a shared vision, they formed around instinct. Stephen Carpenter brought weight. His guitar playing was low, slow, and massive, designed to feel physical rather than flashy. Abe Cunningham's drumming was fluid and unpredictable. He wasn't interested in rigid structure, he played with feel, not rules. Chi-Cheng added movement. His bass lines weren't just foundations, they carried groove, melody, and emotion. And then there was Chino Moreno. Chino didn't sing like a traditional frontman, he reacted. One moment he whispered, the next he screamed. That emotional volatility became the band's center even before anyone realized it. Deftones' early live shows were inconsistent. Some nights, the band locked in completely, loud, hypnotic, overwhelming. Other nights, they sounded raw and barely held together, but even when things went wrong, something lingered. Audiences didn't always know how to respond. They weren't sure if they were watching a metal band, an alternative band, or something else entirely, but they remembered it. In a sea of bands trying to sound correct, Deftones sounded honest. That mattered more than precision. As Deftones began playing more shows across California, a problem followed them everywhere. No one knew where to place them. They were too heavy for alternative radio, too emotional for traditional metal crowds, too atmospheric for hardcore scenes. At a time when genre determined survival, Deftones existed in the margins. Labels hesitated, some meetings ended with polite interest, others ended with confusion. Early demos circulated quietly, enough to keep hope alive, but not enough to guarantee progress. For a band with no money and no safety net, that uncertainty was exhausting. Like most young bands, Deftones weren't just fighting industry doubt, they were fighting reality. Jobs conflicted with rehearsals, bills piled up, equipment broke. The idea of quitting didn't feel dramatic, it felt responsible. Tension built within the band. Arguments happened, frustration grew, but quitting never fully won. Because on stage, something real happened. When Deftones played live, everything made sense again. Deftones' shows weren't about perfection, they were about release. Crowds felt the energy, the emotion, the chaos, the honesty. That connection kept the band moving forward when logic said they shouldn't. It wasn't fame, it wasn't money. It was proof that what they were doing mattered, even if only to a small group of people. Slowly, word spread. Eventually, Deftones caught the attention of Maverick Records. Even then, it wasn't certainty, it was risk. They weren't signed because they fit a trend. They were signed because they didn't. The band entered the studio to record Adrenaline with limited time, limited money, and limited expectations. There was no pressure to succeed, only pressure to survive. When Adrenaline was released, it didn't explode. There were no massive singles, no immediate cultural moment, but it didn't disappear either. The album found its audience slowly, through touring, word of mouth, and repeat listens. Fans who connected to it connected deeply. They felt understood. Even before fame arrived, Deftones were shaping something. They showed that heavy music didn't need strict boundaries, that vulnerability could coexist with aggression, that atmosphere could matter as much as riffs. Other musicians noticed, not because Deftones were everywhere, but because they were different. By the late 1990s, Deftones stood on unstable ground. They were touring more, their confidence was growing, their sound was evolving. But success was still fragile. They were one bad decision away from fading out, one internal collapse away from disappearing. This was the moment before everything changed, before recognition, before defining albums, before Deftones became a name people knew. Before they were famous, Deftones were uncertain, misunderstood, and constantly on the edge of collapse. They didn't rise quickly, they endured, and maybe that's why they lasted. Because from the beginning, Deftones weren't built for trends, they were built to survive them. If you enjoy stories like this, the artists, the moments, and the paths that shape music history, consider subscribing to the Music Archive. There are many more stories like this to come,